Is it Plough? Okay, so hi, here we are. It's another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. Now, my guest today was, I have to say, really like the prototypical big talk conversation that I've had. And when I first started to conceive of what this show could be, I I really thought back to the conversation that he and I had. So, my guest today is my friend Chris Plough, and Chris sees the world differently from really pretty much everybody you know. He sees a world where we're all liberated, where we're all fulfilled, where we're all free to own our story, to carve our own path, to make a difference in this world, and to do it in a way that is really fulfilling to us. Now, he had the typical career in technology and startups. He created for Oracle Transportation Management a system that became their premium services company for consulting, for training, for hosting. He while he was doing that, went back to school, finished a degree in theater arts and acting, directing, design. And you're going to see some of that creativity come through with some of the solutions that he found to the life that he found himself trapped in. He built a company called Mavenwire to an 8-figure global company. He competed against these billion-dollar companies as competition and did really well. And then he burned out. Now, I want to give a trigger warning to those who are listening. There's going to be talk of suicide. There's going to be talk of depression. We're going to have talk of a homicide. This is going to be a deep and tough conversation. So if these are issues for you, I want to tell you right now to abort and go listen to another podcast. We've got lots of great shows. But if this is something that has been in your life or something that you're curious about and you've always wanted to know more from, I can guarantee that this conversation is going to change your life, because the conversation that I had with him that night changed my life. Now, we had this moment at a dinner, Chris, where there were like 12 of us sitting outside a hotel just having drinks. It was like, I don't know, 9 o'clock at night. It was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I was sitting next to you. I had never met you before. The rest of the people around us had known you. And you said something that was like a little sort of weird and a little sort of funny. And I turned to you and I said, well, that's interesting. Tell me about your mother, as like a joke. And you said, well, my mother is dead. My mother died from a homicide suicide when I was 16. And I went, uh, 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 what? And 5 of the people who were sitting in the closest proximity sort of leaned back and went, whoa, because they knew the story. And they also knew me, and they knew I only had deep conversations. And some of the people hung out and listened to that conversation. We had that conversation until sunrise the next day. One by one, they all started to peel off, but they just sat and they listened. And that conversation, really, when I thought about creating the show, I was like, that's what I want to recreate. So welcome to Big Talk. Let's have some big
Oh,
talk.
yes, let's have some big talk. You put a beautiful disclaimer on there that we're going to talk about some deep things. I just want to put a couple layers on if I could.
Yeah.
One is, if you haven't experienced any of this, beautiful. Like, this may help you relate to or understand somebody who's gone through some difficult times. Number two is, if you've experienced some darkness or some difficulty in your life, but it hasn't been to this depth, it doesn't matter. It's all relative. It really comes down to, like, what are the deeper points we've hit in our life? What are the higher points we've hit in our own lives? It's not a comparison to anybody else. It's not an absolute scale. It's relative to each person. And then last but not least, I wouldn't talk about these things if I wasn't like good, comfortably, emotionally, mentally, etc. So I know there's a lot of empathetic people out there, and just know that I'm well, and that's why we can talk about these things so openly.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's such an important side of the trigger warning that we see, which is there's some issues that are going to be talked about, but sometimes we worry about ourselves and we also worry about the other person. I learned one of the most important things in my speaking life, and you know this too, is that when you're on stage, you don't ever want the audience to worry if you're okay. So I thank you for saying that, because I not only are you okay, the way that you found your way to being okay has been multi-layered and came with literal crashes along the way as well. So one of the things that I think is fascinating, like you there you were. Like, take us back to when you're running your company. It's an 8-figure global company. You're super successful. You have everything. Like, on paper, your life is perfect. Take us back to what that felt like to achieve that kind of success.
It was everything that I believed that I had wanted, right? Like, remember, like growing up, I had told my grandmother that I was going to give her my first $1 million. She's like, "Really?" I'm like, well, maybe my second, because I'm going to need the first million to make the second million, right? And I just, my parents had always struggled with money. Like, money was just a dividing force that was often in the relationship. And I wasn't poor, but I wasn't well off. And so I was just always saw these things as a way to prove myself, a way to validate honestly. If I just being brutally honest, validate to a father who wasn't around, my biological father, that I was worthy, that I was good enough, that I was worthy of love. And there were no bounds to that. So every time I got to a new level, and there were some incredible levels in the height that I got to, I didn't even realize where I was. It didn't seem to matter. It didn't fill the hole, and I just kept driving for more. And unfortunately, with the stuff that it hit, and losing my parents at the time that I did, and to be kind, I know that there's a lot of facts and stuff in here, so I'm just going to make a minor correction. I lost my parents when I was 30. So the company had started, everything was kind of on this uphill, and I lost my parents right before the last economic recession.
Hmm.
And so I essentially went straight into not dealing with the pain of them, and instead putting more and more time into the company. Then the economic recession hit, and then the company was just literally like on a lifeline the entire time. And I just put more and more time and energy into it. Stopped eating well, stopped hanging out with people who cared about me, didn't really talk to friends or family because I didn't want to deal with the emotional strife. And I just found myself spiraling deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where at one point I crashed a motorcycle in the middle of the night, slid it 40 feet down a curb because I was going too fast around a corner. And I got up the next day like nothing had happened, even though I had fractured my ankle and a bunch of other stuff, and just pretended like I was good. I was so numb to the world that even something like that couldn't stop me. And that was the beginning of this tumble that I began to feel. And I began to look for like what is an actual fulfilling and rewarding life if everything that I've achieved to this point didn't seem to actually fill the hole that I felt inside.
Is that the trap that people fall into, that you have this idea of what success is going to feel like and look like, and then you get there and it's not. Either you realize that you set your sights too low, so you want to work harder and do something else, or maybe it's anticlimactic because some of the excitement is in the journey. Or when you finally get there, it's sort of like that's the victory lap, like the work is actually going into before. Or maybe you realize that you've been chasing the wrong goals, or you thought that you're filling your bank account when you really needed to be filling your heart, right? Like, we sort of chase all the wrong things. But do people, I mean, is the racing, the motorcycle, is that part of the problem? Like, we continue to look for more things to fill because we're filling the wrong holes?
I think it's definitely a symptom of what's going on that's a difficult issue. But I also the more I've come to this, at one point I judged myself harshly for being so driven, for being so wanting to like build a reputation, build a bunch of money, be known, all of these other things. But now I look back and realize like it was a necessary phase of life for me. And I think for a lot of people, it's a necessary phase, right? Realizing that we're driven, a lot of us, off of this fuel of ambition. And that could come from fear because you don't want to not have enough. It could come from like for me, this non-feeling of worth. And I just wanted to feel worthy and like I was truly enough to myself and to others. Um, it could come from a variety of reasons, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's a fuel that gets you to a point. And if I've learned anything, we have these transition points in life as we go through these stratas, these levels of the atmosphere, if you will. And if we're not willing to change how we operate and possibly even the fuel that we operate on, then eventually we run out and like crash back down to earth. So I think there's a lot of reasons that people get there. To answer your questions very directly, but I don't know that it's necessarily bad. I think that the sooner we can realize that there might be a better way, or there might be a better fuel, or there might be something that is actually more rewarding, or we can put time and attention to those true pains and hurts that we have inside and face the things that are actually scary to us, then we can find that new path that takes us through the next strata of the atmosphere.
So how do we find those things? Because we live in the society of the I'll be happy when, right? Like I'll be happy when I get the job, I'll be happy when I get the car, I'll be happy when I get married, I'll be when I get divorced. And I've always said that I think I'll be happy when are like the four worst words in the English language, because they continue to tell us that the happiness is just outside of our grasp, and we're like one purchase away from, a fulfilled life, right? Like we have this consumerist world that we live in, where if you just one more purchase, one more this, one more that. But I think that's the wrong fuel. But we're told constantly that that's the solution. So how do we, in the face of overwhelming evidence in the form of instafluencers who are telling us that it's like follow your passion with like girls in flower crowns, how do we find the right fuel? How do we one realize it's the wrong fuel? And because
Hmm.
we just think it's just us, clearly it's just the next thing, I have to keep going. How do we realize it's the wrong fuel? And then when we do, how do we find the right fuel?
I think there's a meta question behind it. I'm gonna answer first, and then I'm gonna move into everything that you just asked. I think the meta question behind it is this just a symptom of like overwork or overachievement in this, profession-driven or money-driven society that we're in? And the answer that I found is it's pervaded. Like I moved to exploring consciousness, so we can get into way more details on this
Yeah.
if it's helpful for your audience. But moving to exploring consciousness in a lot of different ways, and I found myself on a very similar track after a while, which was, oh, enlightenment. That's the new goal. I'll be happy when I'm enlightened. I'll be happy when I'm awakened, right? And so I essentially created the same paradigm in a more I don't know. What would typically be a holistic or maybe even more selfless frame, even though it wasn't. I was looking for my own advancement to enlightenment, my own advancement to awakening, and I'll be
Yeah.
happy when I get there, right?
I love that. Like you
Um,
you 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 brought the like type A achievement personality to like finding your zen.
yeah. I'll 120 hours a week this spiritual problem. Don't you
Right.
worry about
Right.
it.
I'll out meditate you.
And uh, there's a lot of things that we've heard over time. Some of these sound very cliche, but I think that they actually exist for a reason. And you see them in spiritual texts. You see them in a lot of meditative mindfulness traditions. You see them in a lot of healing with trauma and everything else. And so I've found the path in a lot of different ways. To be bluntly honest with you, first I went on these dramatic adventures in order to get out of my ordinary life, and then I found psychedelics. I found psychedelics in certain ways were a beautiful medicine for me. And then I found mindfulness and meditation. Then I found deep masterminds and groups. I found a lot of different paths along the way that brought me to the same point. And if I can put it as simply as I can, the thing that was useful was I surrounded myself with people who I cared about, but as importantly, deeply cared about me, and who were willing, when I was just veering off course or I was doing something that I just wasn't aware of, or I was going into one of my patterns, they were willing to go, hey, Chris, so what are you doing?
Yeah.
What's going on? How are you? Right. And then that blind spot that was over here that was so glaringly obvious for everybody else, they were willing to allow me to see, even if it was an uncomfortable conversation between us, especially when it was an uncomfortable conversation between us. And so that gave me a frame of reference outside of my own head and outside of my own patterns and outside of my own issues. Right. And then the other tools that I've mentioned, whether we're talking about psychedelics, we're talking about travel, we're talking about mindfulness and meditation, most recently doing things with neurological brain stimulation and going into neurological labs, et cetera, to help strengthen neurological pathways. Like all of those, what I found is they're just bringing me different tools to pull me back into the present moment. And in this present moment, I'm able to be present with myself and to feel the things that I had learned for decades to turn off. The emotions, physical pain within the body, these little nuances and sensations of my intuition speaking to me, right? In my belief system and everything else, like I believe that there is an experience beyond this world. I'm a spiritual person, and I believe that there are other energies that kind of give like guidance as well. But none of that really matters. At the very least, psychologically, even if it's just my unconscious, psychologically, there's these little subtle voices that are trying to guide me well. And I was so numbed out and so overstimulated and so busy, I couldn't listen to them. And so as I found these different pathways to slow down, I could listen to them. And in listening to them, I often heard things that were difficult to be with. Just yesterday, I found, because of some stuff that I was doing, clearing out this part of my barn that had to do with father figures that I've lost. And I was cleaning off a bunch of tools that they had passed down to me. I found myself overwhelmed with this sense of melancholy. And in the past, I would have been like, be happy, like, be happy. I don't want to feel this way. And instead, I just allowed the experience to happen and I felt into it. And I was melancholy and sad and I grieved for an evening and it was all good. Like I was okay. I wasn't fearful of losing myself into some darkness. I wasn't fearful of things that I was pushing away. And when that process was over, it's like it flowed through. Like I felt really more full because I had accepted and integrated a part of me that had been separated psychologically, unconsciously for a while. And now I feel a more integrated whole being. And that's my path. I'm trying to figure out how to find all of these parts of me and others and help them be integrated and accepted. And I believe that that's the path for a deeper awareness of self and a deeper healing. Now I've monologued for a while, so break in and guide us wherever you want to go. But that's where the question took me.
Well, I want to talk about the Gobi Desert and I want to talk about Mongolia because I, I am a firm believer that self-love is a radical act, right? Like actually being in love, like finding love for yourself. It's not just acceptance. It's not celebrating all the good stuff. It's not, all the ridiculous things, the fridge magnet rationalization that we see all over social media, but actually finding love for yourself is a radical act. And you couple that then with, the Buddhist lesson that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And you tell this beautiful story about driving this old ambulance from the UK all the way to Mongolia and having that moment where you basically bury your parents and you bury a picture of your parents in the Gobi Desert and you grieve for them for the first time. So you had hung on to all of the suffering for so many years and then you let yourself experience the pain in a way that it gave you closure to a certain part of it. And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about, being able to do that with the tools that you found, yesterday in your garage. I don't know that you would have been able to do that had you not had the experience in the Gobi Desert and gone through all that. So I'd love for you to take us and feel free to monologue. It's great. I love it. I would love for you to take us through that experience because it is this radical, crazy, adventurous self-love that you went on 10,000 miles. Why did you go on this trip?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that somebody came up to you, was like, "You should do this," and you're like, "No way," and then everything fell apart and you just went.
Uh, if I'm looking back really honest with myself, like it came down to the fact that that was a form of self-preservation. I
Yeah.
knew that the life that I was leading on, I wasn't going to last very much longer. And so the way I rationalized it was, look, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around, so I might as well go do something grand, right? And I got to bring two friends on, and we got to have this adventure. And it's put on by a group called the Adventurists. That we were running so late, we never really saw anybody, and so it ended up with the three of us in this ambulance that I purchased on eBay that was retired out of Scotland, sight unseen. And then we ended up driving it from the UK all through Europe up to Estonia, then all through Russia from St. Petersburg to the far end of the border with Mongolia, and then all across Mongolia and the Gobi Desert. As I jump into a lot of things, I'm often optimistic and just realistic enough, but also naive enough to allow something to happen, right? And
Oh, that's
so,
the best though. I mean,
uh,
I people always ask me why I dropped out of law school and joined a presidential campaign, and I was like, because I was so young and naive and optimistic that I didn't think that failure was an option. I just only saw the possibility.
Yes,
That's
and
how
that's
all
it.
great
Like
adventures begin.
100%. I think that realizing that there could be difficult things that happen along the way, but not fully believing that failure is an option is a really powerful tool, because then you can always find a way. Like the examples on this, we're going through Russia in the middle of the night, and the roads had gotten like incredibly rough through Russia, and we're going along, going along, going along. All of a sudden, boom, thunk, like the whole ambulance falls to the side, and I see our back wheels fly past us down the road as we're going like 50 miles an hour, right? We're like scraping on the side of the road and pulling off. Couldn't find anything, had to sleep in this like Catarand ambulance overnight, get up in the morning and try to find why our wheels had fallen off, literally fallen off, where they had gone, how the brakes had fallen apart, etc. Right? And that type of hijinks just followed throughout this thing. And at first, like, it was this beautiful, beautiful excitement, like, oh, there's a problem, let's solve it. And I was getting away from all the normal pressures in life that we have, like email and deadlines and financial responsibilities and everything else, and into more visceral things. Where are we going to sleep tonight? What are we going to eat today? Are we safe? Like things that I think our body and our nervous system is really attuned to. But then as this went on, we started to go into Mongolia, the ambulance started breaking down more and more. We had electrical fires on underneath the hood. We had doors that fell off. We lost our brakes, both hand brake, like parking brake, and foot brake for the last 1,200 miles. No brakes. Lost our starter, had to start on hills, etc. So all these things were going on, but there were beautiful challenges. And eventually we hit a point where we literally just could not continue forward at all. The radiator had been leaking out so much fluid that the engine overheated and it just blew. And we were 250 miles from the end. And it was honestly emotionally hard in that moment, because I felt, again, I was making all this stuff very personal. I felt like a failure. But what opened up in that moment was that my friend Steve, who was with us, had to hitchhike into the next town, which was our destination. And luckily, this vehicle, this Range Rover, not Range Rover, a Toyota Land Cruiser came by, and he was able to get in and go. And I stayed with the ambulance and with our filming equipment, because we were filming the thing. And I had a day there by myself in the middle of the Gobi Desert, where
And
now there was no excitement. Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, and so you are on this journey, which is in some ways an escape from what feels like a life that where you feel like you're failing, right? You success, success, success. Things fall apart. The economy's tanking. You declare bankruptcy. You've got all this pain that's like pushed down in the pit of your stomach from parents, and then you go on this thing, and you the end is in sight, and then it feels like a failure again, and then you're stuck by yourself for a day with
Yeah.
your own thoughts. Like that, I mean,
But
that
by
just can't be a recipe for good stuff.
Well, yes and no, because I had by that point probably about 9,000 plus miles of driving. And, you can't talk and do stuff the entire time, even though it's an exciting trip. And so in the back of my head, in the unconscious, I realized just a lot of stuff was processing, a lot of stuff
Mm,
was processing. And so I actually, at that point, was that stillness in that moment, that leaving of everybody behind, even the people that I'd come on the trip with, and being alone in the desert, gave space for all the stuff that had been processing for the last 40 some odd days to come up.
ah,
And I just wept. And then I realized I had this little effigy, like you said, of my parents that was there in the ambulance. And I looked off in the desert, and the desert reminded me of New Mexico, which was the last place I lived with my parents. And I realized this was the perfect place. And so I walked off to where I couldn't see the road, dug a little grave, and put the effigy in, and sat there. And just as you said, for the first time, allowed myself to actually grieve. And I think the fear that I had in those moments, fear that we can sometimes have, is that if you just crack the door a little bit, it's going to be so overwhelming that you're just lost, right? And that's the way it feels when the emotions come rushing in. But after a period of time, and I was probably out there for an hour or so, like it began to subside, and I began to realize that I wasn't lost. I hadn't fallen into some darkness that I couldn't get out of. I had released the pressure of some emotions that had been building inside for 2+ years by that point. And I could finally be with them. And then as I walked back to the ambulance and I sat there, I just realized that the life that I'd led to this point, it wasn't the life that I was going to lead forward. And I had no idea what the life forward was going to be. But I began to become excited to figure it out again. I actually began to look forward to life again. And that was the key difference, right? Like when you wake up in the morning, and even if it's challenging, even if it's difficult, even if there are things going on that you wish weren't going on, if you have something that you look forward to, you're like, oh, I still want to be on this side of the dirt today, then it's a completely different game than one that you wish you weren't playing.
Mm, mm. Thank you for sharing that story. It is the the concept that when you open the door a little bit, you don't know what's going to happen, right? There's like this floodgate's going to come through and it's going to carry you to somewhere that you don't necessarily want to be, is one that I can relate to deeply. I am a control freak of the highest order. Like I like to sit in the aisle seat of every airplane, partly because I have a tiny bladder, but also because I just am that much of a control freak. I know that if the plane goes down, we're all dying in a fiery explosion. I get that. But I just want the illusion of control, like as if there's some choice. Like that is how much of a control freak I am. And so I have always worked very hard to sort of keep the emotions inside and be the one who's asking the questions and who's facilitating the conversation, because I think a good offense is a good defense, right? So I'm always good at that's what I always do. But lately and over the last 6 months, I've started doing a whole lot more personal writing. You've inspired me. You do a lot of journaling and you post a lot of that on social media and some of your long form writing. And what I found is that I am actually a better writer when I write angry or joyous or maybe a little drunk or maybe a little stoned, or like when I
Yeah.
remove the governor that's stopping me from feeling the emotions completely, and then it pours out of me in this way it's so unabashedly honest. And I'm interested in the sort of honesty of real feelings. Are there moments when are when you've opened those doors and you see things that you don't actually like, that you're ashamed of, or that you're afraid of? What do you do with those parts of you that you find when the floodgates open?
Yeah. Especially in the beginning, for me and part of my process, often, like often, because the parts that I had suppressed the most, if you like think of this analogy, like they were the parts that felt the most pressure. And so as you
Yes.
release the pressure cooker, they were the ones that came up first. And there were a lot of things that I felt shame about, and things that took me a long time to be open and honest with. So that trip to Mongolia was in 2010, and it wasn't until 2018, I believe, 2017, or 2017, I think, that I was open with my family and friends for the first time, that I'd been through depressions for decades and that I had suicidal thoughts and I tried to take my life when I was 16. And those were things I felt intense shame about. And nobody judged me. Like nobody judged me or thought the things that I thought about myself, but I had such internal shame that it was hard to even open up to show those things. And what I found is, you don't have to do it all at once. You don't, right? Like it's okay to do just a little bit at a time. And I know that we're in this culture where it's like, okay, I just want to get it all done. If I go to this one event, or if I do this one particular medicine, or if I, do this thing, I'm going to be all better.
Yes.
And those can help to relieve a lot of the pressure and to bring you back into coherence with yourself, like emotional, mental, psychological coherence with yourself. They could be helpful, especially when led by somebody who's trained in therapy and everything else. Like integration is 90% of this. And so integration
Mm,
becomes incredibly important. And that support of integration and having people around you is what allows you to continue on this journey, even though you realize things about you that you might be ashamed of, or you feel guilty, or you feel sad, or you feel these things that you were afraid to feel before. But each time you do, I was told this by a meditation coach, and it didn't make sense for me until years later. You begin to develop a taste for it. You begin to actually look forward to the release. It's this cathartic that, like, you just feel so much better afterwards. And so you begin to look forward to it. And that becomes its own reward system in going down this path. And what I've found is that the little and often actually gets you further than these big events that have to then have recovery or integration, or quite honestly, psychologically and mentally and emotionally could go either way. You need to be really careful about how you soften up and remold your psychology, especially using a lot of tools like psychedelics. Um, and as you go through that process, you develop the taste for it, you develop the skills, you become more and more comfortable, right? So I'm going to use psychedelics as an example here because I think it can be useful. Although these same things happen to me now in deep meditations and everything else. Like there's a lot of ways to get to an open emotional place once you realize that you can. But in the beginning, when I used them, I had a lot of control and things in place. I had the playlist, I had all the things, and I had all these things in control. So that the moment my emotions started to go one way, I could be like, boom, don't want to feel that, guide me back this way, right?
Yes.
And then I got to a point where I had released enough that I began to realize that it's like my emotions were this wave, and I could surf this wave a little bit here, and I could surf it a little bit back. And then I didn't need the playlist. And then when it got a little bit more difficult, I could allow it to be difficult because I began to develop this sense of safety within me. Just confidence from having actually gone through the practice of doing this many, many, many times. And then after a while, I realized I didn't actually have to surf and control anymore. I could actually allow the experience to take me to whatever needed to be felt and released. Even some of the things that I ended up like weeping and crying and just feeling this intense internal hurt for hours. It wasn't painful. It wasn't suffering. That's the distinction that you made in Buddhism from Buddhism, and I 100% agree with. Things can be uncomfortable, but they don't have to be suffering. And I realized I felt safe the entire time, and it felt so cathartic to allow this to go where it went and to not have to control it. And so I've actually brought that more and more into my meditation practice, more into my mindfulness, more and more into life of not needing the level of control that I did before. And let me be clear about this. This is now going to be a self-diagnosis, something about me and the things I've seen with other people in trauma. This has nothing to do with you. I found that people who have experienced a significant amount of trauma in their life become really controlling and become really rigid because you realize that, especially emotional experiences outside of certain bounds, feel very dangerous. They feel like your life is threatened. You literally go into fight or flight. That's part of what PTSD and deep trauma are. You go into fight or flight because an emotional experience has gone beyond certain bounds. Problem is, you numb yourself out to feeling true joy, and you numb yourself out to feeling the sorrows that you need to feel, and you stay in this controlled range, but you become very, very fragile. I was, where if something kicks you outside of that range, all of a sudden you've gone from normal, happy, calm person to boom, full on freak out, full on fight or flight experience, full on hiding away for people for days or weeks or months at a time. And so as you get more comfortable with this, you release the governors and you begin to allow yourself to feel all these things. You need less control and you actually become more resilient, and you're not fragile in the way that this controllingness was, especially around emotions. And yet, because you're always playing on this edge that you have, you're always playing on it. It feels scary every time. Every time I go for that level, that next level of surrender, that next level of release, like I feel I'm used to it, but I feel almost, these aren't the right words, so please excuse them, but I feel almost terrified, almost because it's this releasing of a further level of control. And that control in my unconscious is related to safety. And if I'm not safe, I don't know what's going to happen. And that's how the thoughts spiral, right? But I realize that every time I have, because I've also learned how to do this responsibly with the support systems, with integration, with caring, with loving of myself and from people around me, that it just is a further relaxing, a further releasing, a further separation of these fears of fears. They're not even real fears, just the fear of something intangible and irrational. And each time I do has allowed me to be deeper in love with life, deeper in love with those that I care about, more real with the people that I love and I care about as well. And so you and I got to have that incredibly deep conversation that night. And I'm so glad. Like glad to the level I can't put it into words that we had that. But those, even at that time, were rare for me. I could have those with specific people, but I couldn't have them in a more open context. And now I get to have that same level of openness with other people as well, including people that I haven't spent time with before, I haven't met before. And so my life has gotten richer as a result.
Why do you think you were able to have that conversation with me that night? I mean, we
Um,
never met before. We didn't know each other. I asked you what could have been, construed as a pretty offensive conversation if I had
oh, my
known anything,
answer
even the first thing
also could
about
have
you.
been, yeah, my answer also could have, because I was at that time,
I mean, I was
I
snarky and
think
you were
there's,
s you hit right back.
but I think it's a part of it, right? So
Yeah.
I recognized within you something unconsciously, and this wasn't a conscious thing. Unconsciously, I recognized something within you. And when you poked, and there was some poking that was going on that night, right? Then I poked back. And then when you didn't like back away, like, oh, I don't want that. And then you kind of like leaned in, I'm like, oh, okay, this is a different experience.
Mhm.
Cool. We can begin to be open. We begin to open the floodgates. And so, like, we had a little tit and tat back and forth that I think allowed us to sync up and realize that we could go deeper fast. And I think that when you do that unconsciously, you recognize people who you understand, because I think there's a lot of similarities between you and me,
Mhm.
right? And then second, and I do this a lot with people now, like you find that people are always testing the bounds, like what kind of conversation can I have? And I always sit there, something I don't know if I learned from you, but I'll definitely give you credit for, of being able to sit there with somebody regardless of what they've just said, and to be curious and want to know more instead of flinching or backing away, right? Because then somebody who expects to feel rejected, or expects that I've just now thrown up a guard and you're going to go off and do your thing and I'm not going to have to worry about you, like there's an opening there, and then that opening can have a beautiful connection, a beautiful conversation, a beautiful depth, like you said, where we talked all the way to sunrise.
But you have to allow yourself to be uncomfortable, right? Like, you had to allow yourself to be like, "All right, I don't know where this is gonna go. I don't normally talk about these at that stage of your life. I don't normally talk about these topics. I don't know this person. I don't know if I'm necessarily gonna be safe. It's public. There are all these people around us, right?" But you had to be willing to let yourself go there, and I think that's I'm I don't wanna out the person who I'm describing, so I'm gonna describe the story in sort of very vague terms, but I know
Yeah.
somebody who has had depression her entire life, who always felt like there was something wrong with her because it was not something that was talked about, openly in their family, and she started taking medication for it, and then her best friend got sick and died, and she had to bury that friend and didn't cry through the entire process of the taking care of her during the sickness, of the death, of the funeral, of any of it. And she just was like, "That's it. I'm done. I'm not taking any more medication for the depression because I can't feel the highs and the lows." And then she spent, a long time really feeling the pain of the sort of unfettered depression because she didn't have the help that she needed until she finally, figured out how to manage medication and the titration around that. And that goes right to what you're saying about having the right support system in place so that that's 90% of it, right? Having the right people and being able to talk about it and having the medical help that you need. Did do you ever, I don't know if you have a history with medication to deal with it, but do you is that something that made it worse, or like were there like how far did it have to go before you were able to bring it back to a place where you could feel comfortable pushing on the edges of the "I'm okay being uncomfortable" bits?
Um, so if I
Sorry, that was like 12
really,
questions in once, but
yeah, no, no, no. I just want to. I'm taking a second because I want to make sure that I'm giving you the most honest, up to date answer, because these things are ever evolving, right? Um, I had a lot of biases against medicine. I have throughout my life. Matter of fact, it's funny that psychedelics became an important tool for me because I had an incredible bias against any type of drug, illicit or legal,
yeah.
for most of my life. And so those for me were just not an option. I was going to find a way through. I had developed psychological ways of segmenting off emotions and segmenting off people and relationships and everything else. So I had found another way around it, that I've spent a lot of time disassembling since, to be
Mm,
perfectly honest with you. Um, One of the reasons that I am way more outspoken about all of this stuff now is because I believe that one of the gifts that I've had from early on in life is I'm wired to step into the uncomfortable. I just always have been. I've been one of those people who's been willing, and at the beginning, I think it was just because I wanted the attention, and that attention was again went back to self-worth. So the skill developed off of something that may not have been the healthiest fuel, but it's become this incredible tool that I still have, and I'm very, very grateful for, right? Being grateful for the gifts and everything that's happened in my past. And so I get to be more uncomfortable, and I'm willing to be more uncomfortable than a lot of people. What I found is I get to be somebody who and it's not my sole responsibility. I'm not the only one who does this. There's a lot of people who have this, but I get to create this wide and open space. And because I can step forward and because I can be comfortable, like I say, everything within this space is safe. And if you want to step into any place within this, you're welcome to. If you want to push on the boundaries, you're welcome to. If you just want to play in this small little part of it because that's your bandwidth, that's emotionally all that you can handle right now, completely cool. I'm good with it. I'm comfortable. I'm safe. I can help you be safe. And so we can traverse this together, whether it's just through a conversation, whether it's in a deeper way of helping somebody through some emotional stuff. And so, in truth, I believe that it's a gift from some things that have happened in my past. And I use that gift now because I realize that not everybody has that same ability, that same gift to be as uncomfortable to begin with. But once you find a couple of people that you're able to actually open up with, and you don't get that recoil, you get that acceptance, you get that understanding, you get that like that love and that care, then I find that every person begins to open up more and more, and they actually find that there's way more people who are willing to have those conversations than they ever realized. And then they begin to develop this support system. That's exactly what happened with me. Like a mutual friend of ours, Joey, became part of what I call the list. And the list were the people that I had been open to 100% with all the trials and tribulations that I'd been through. And even though when I'm hurt, I'm very isolationist. I'd rather just go off and heal myself and turn the world off and not deal with anybody. They were the people that I promised I would call when I got to my darkest of my darks. And
mm,
my integrity of my word would keep me to call them as opposed to falling down deeper and deeper and deeper, right? And these are the people that every time I had a conversation with them, they were like, I love you. Tell me more. They weren't judging me, even if they didn't understand, even if they hadn't had the same experiences. They were, what's the term for it? And I might get this slightly wrong, but an empathic listener, right? They
mm.
were somebody who was willing to listen and somebody who was willing to show that they cared, who didn't judge, didn't have to tell you how they fixed it or how to fix it, didn't have to do anything but be there and allow you to get this stuff out of your own psyche and out of your own emotions and everything else. And I found that, quite honestly, that is one of the most powerful roles that can be played. And so, to turn this around for people who are listening to this, who have been like, okay, I appreciate the story, but I don't feel those same things. I haven't been to those depths or those hurts, but I know somebody who is. Since the one last talk that I released, I had a lot of people reaching out. One person being very concerned about his son, and so the advice that I would give to somebody who's witnessing somebody else go through this, who
Oh, good.
doesn't know
This
what
is
to
where I
do,
wanted to get to. I'm so excited.
right?
This is my next question was how do you be on the other side of that conversation in a way that actually
Yes.
helps the other person get to where they need to be? Not where you want them to be, but where they need to be.
Yes, and because like honestly, more people are going to be not in the space than are going to be in this space. Let's be
Yes.
perfectly honest here, right? And it is hard. It's uncomfortable because you don't know what to say. You're afraid of somebody opening up something, and then maybe within you there's something that gets triggered. You're afraid that it's going to be so large you don't know how to handle it, right?
And
And
and the
so
thing the list, right? You have these list of people that are so near and dear to you, and you've promised them that you'll call them if ever you're in the depth of hell. And yet there's also part of us that loves those people and respects them, and that's why they're on our list, and we don't want to disappoint them by being a hot mess. So we don't want to call them at those moments, but we've promised them that we should. But then we do, and they save us. They help us save ourselves because they're able to have that conversation. So let's talk about the advice that you give people who are seeing those who they love around them suffering right now.
Yeah. Because you brought it up, I'm going to address one thing first, and then I'm going to go exactly to that.
Yeah.
So one is on the list. Initially, the list for me was I would call them in the direst of dire, because asking for help is when I feel weakest and I feel most vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
That's why asking for help in any form is one of the most challenging things for me. And so I was willing to ask for help when like there was no other alternative, when I literally felt like my life was on the line. And those have been rare, but they've definitely happened. And now I'm expanding that list to say, well, when I'm just having a difficult time, it's worth reaching out and talking to people. Like I've actually up to the bar of when I'm willing to ask for help, and I'm finding that rewarding within myself, right? So I'm saying this to say you can start wherever you want, but realize that these conversations don't have to be at the direst of the dire. Matter of fact, that's challenging because you're putting somebody very much on the spot, right? You're putting somebody on the spot where it is the absolute most difficult that it could be. And the reason there's more than one person on the list is because not everybody will have the emotional bandwidth, or not everybody will have the time and everything else. And by having more people on the list, you can spread that out, right? And that's
Yes. Yes.
why it's so helpful to have, I would say, 5 people. I ended up with like 11 on mine. I was very fortunate, but I could spread everything out.
And
So
you can
now to
train them over time, right? Like, if you're not just calling them the direst moments, if you're calling them when things are, like, a little rough, you can it's almost like any relationship you have. It's like training a puppy, right? It's like training a spouse. Like, you teach them what you need, you teach them what whatever your love languages are, whatever the things are, so that when you do call them in that moment, they already know how to speak Chris to Chris.
And you're training yourself. You're training
You're training
yourself
yourself.
that you don't have to wait till it gets so bad that there's no other alternative, right? You're bottling the stuff up for that period, unconsciously, consciously, whatever it
Yes.
is.
Yes.
Again, consistently, just a little bit every day, just releasing that pressure, feeling into oneself, being connected, etc., gets you way further in the long term. That was a
Mhm.
difficult lesson for me to learn because I'm wired for the dramatic, i.e., the trip to Mongolia, i.e., the other things that I've done, right? And I'm now rewiring towards the more consistent, the more safe, the more calm, and finding as much reward in that as I did before in the very exaggerated. Um, so for somebody who's like, well, okay, I know somebody who's going through a difficult time, but I don't know what to do. Um, a There's a couple different things that go on there. Like one is a lot of the fear is because you believe you won't be able to help them, or you believe it's going to be too much, and it's just like anything else we do. It's a fear of self, right? It's like, okay, maybe I'm not good enough to be able to help them, etc. It's sometimes a little convoluted, but it can be a fear of self. Like, just realize in this moment, if you're gonna have a conversation with somebody, it's not about you. It's just about being present with them. And then when you realize that there actually isn't a lot that you have to do except to be present, except to help them feel that you care and to listen, that quite honestly, 90+% of the time, all somebody needs is somebody who's willing to listen, allowing these emotions to come out, allowing them to feel like they aren't a freak, that they aren't broken, that they aren't some like misshapen emotional blah, right? Like that they're a human, and that they're loved, and that even if they've shown something to you that they feel is the most shameful, the most guilt-ridden thing that they have, that in seeing that you can still, even if you don't agree with it, right, you can go, look, I don't agree with what you did there, but I still love you as a person, I still care about you as a person, you're still a worthy soul in my eyes, right? Like, that is the key, because then they can begin to work through these things. Then they're willing to share more of these things, to get more of these things out. And then they're maybe willing to talk to a therapist. Maybe they're willing to look at other therapies or practices or procedures or rituals that would be helpful for them in the long term, right? And so it's very, very rarely, matter of fact, I can't think of a good example right now when it's about fixing somebody or telling them what to do or being responsible for them. You're not. You're as being that empathic listener, you're just there to witness That's the word. It's an empathic witness. You're
Yes.
there to witness. You're there to experience. You're there to let them know that they're still a beautiful, loved human being. And that is the beginning and the root of all this healing, because you're showing them acceptance. And ultimately, that becomes the model for their own self acceptance, which is the root of almost all of these, probably all of them. I just don't have the data behind it. But I'll say almost all of these emotional issues.
I've always said that my greatest strength, my superpower, is that I'm able to look at people and in pretty short order see their greatness in ways that either they've never been
Mm,
able to see it before or can finally actually believe it and act on it. And and people think it's amazing that I'm able to inspire and motivate, on and on and on and on. But the truth is all I do is I look at people and I'm like, I see you. You're
yes.
awesome. I love you.
So, so,
That's
so
it.
this
That's
right
it.
here,
That's it.
this was, I think, the thing that I recognized between us, right? And I've only felt this a few times to a large degree in my life, but there are some people who literally see other people, like, and it's this deep caring. And I honestly, as simple as this sounds, I believe it just comes down to curiosity and caring. Like you're curious. What is it that makes this person tick? What is it that's going on in their life? And you care. And caring, like it's a super simple word. Like it's not like something that in our society we say is amazing. Caring is a freaking superpower, right? And that's what somebody feels. That's why somebody's willing to open up. That's why somebody's willing to trust your eyes and your experience and what you see over what they're experiencing in that moment, which helps them get outside of that frame and that rut or that spiral or whatever they happen to be going through.
Yeah, because I think what happens is when we rush in to solve the problem, that takes on the receiver's part a whole lot of faith. Like they have to actually believe a that that they're worthy of it and that the problem can be solved and that it's not this sort of dire experience, and b that your solution's the right one. Like it takes a huge leap of faith, which is so different than like you have what you have, well, you have what you need inside of you. Now let's like work on that together. Like I see you, I honor you, I'm listening. And I, when I first started doing executive search, and I spent 20 years doing this, I saw one of the partners in our firm, walking out of the building at the end of the day, and I was like, "Oh man, are you okay? You look like someone just, like told you that your dog died. Like what? Like did you just what look shattered?" And she was like, "No, I've just been listening all day." And I remember thinking in my youthful hubris, like, "Oh, listening. Whatever. How hard can that be?" And then I learned how to listen, not listening, just waiting for the other person to stop talking so I could talk, and not listening so I could rush in and solve their problem and be the hero, but just listening, like really hearing what they're saying and what they're not saying, and then asking questions and staying curious and discovering why they felt that way. And that was, I mean, you could run a marathon or you could actively listen for 4 hours, and I can guarantee the listening is going to be way harder, way harder. But the I always said that I had the honor and the privilege and sometimes the burden of listening to people for 20 years tell me not just what they did or how they did it, but why they did it. And I think as friends, as parents, as managers, as leaders, we're so busy talking and we're so busy trying to think about the sort of megaphone that we're putting out there that we don't just sit in the stillness of the uncertainty of not knowing where the person's going and not knowing what they're thinking about, and that gift of just being able to say I'm listening is so huge. And I love that you're actually spending some of your time now. You actually have on your website, and people can go there at chrisplough.com. You actually have on your website a place like to talk about this project where you're just dedicating some time every week to just listening to people. It's
Right.
incredibly generous.
It's absolutely critical, right? So, and I think this goes to the solution thing. Like, we don't have a lack of information in this world. We honestly, I don't believe, have a lack of solutions in this world, but we do have a lack of connection, a lack of care, a lack of feeling heard, a lack of feeling seen, a lack of feeling understood. And all of that comes down to listening, right? And what I found is that process, that active process you described so incredibly well, is the key. And I realize I've been using this my entire life. I think it's because I've been very empathetic, and because I learned it in the tumultuous relationship of my mom and my dad. I had to pay attention to what was going on in order to feel
Mm,
safe myself. Right? Again, something that came from a difficult place has become this gift, this superpower. And then my only college degree, funny enough, is theater arts. Like we talked a little bit about that as well, right? So like acting is all about listening. So I've learned this for decades upon decades upon decades, and then I've come to realize that like that's the key. And I'm moving forward with some projects now that I believe can help the world, hopefully just help people on a very individual basis understand themselves. And I call it project liberation. It's like, how do we begin to understand ourselves, and how can we free ourselves from the prisons that we create, right?
mm,
And there are things in this that are going to be free. There are things that will be a business, all these different things. And as I stepped into this, I tried to think like, what is the core of it? And what is something that I could do so that it's open and fair to everybody, regardless of where they live in the world, regardless of their background, regardless of their financial situation, regardless of their creed, religion, etc. And I realized it was listening. And
mm.
so I took it as a project to go, great, if I'm going to step forward and help people, and be able to help people in these different levels, etc., then I won't feel comfortable unless I've created something that I think is open and available to everybody. And that's where I Am Listening came up. And there have been times in the beginning, like it was people who I knew who shared things with me that they hadn't shared before, and I got to listen and understand and be witness to that. And it was beautiful. It deepened our relationship. And there were times I'd literally jump on the phone, and I'd never talked to this person before, and I didn't know who they were or their background or what was going on. And that's kind of a beauty as well, because that meant I had zero preconceptions. I wasn't looking at them through the view of anybody else who'd seen them in their lives and who said, oh, that's that person. They always do this thing. That's just how they are. Like, I'd had no idea. And so I got to be very open and honest in listening, just as you've described, like active listening with people. And then at the end of it, if it's useful, then I can give people some feedback, like, well, I saw this thing, what does that mean to you? And not trying to offer solutions, because I don't think it's my place to heal somebody else. It's not my place to fix somebody else. That's each person's individual responsibility. But I can ask questions that help them see something within themselves that may lead them to that next aha, that next moment, that next opening within themselves. And that's the core of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that that it's not your job to fix somebody else. I feel that I say that all the time. I'm like, she's not mine to fix. She's not mine to fix. I just right. I'm not everybody's social worker. I'm not everybody's psychiatrist. I'm not everybody's whatever they need. And yeah, I mean the answers are there. You could easily Google what you need to do. We all know what we need to do. Like you want to lose weight, eat less and exercise more. You want to be more successful in your business, stop, scrolling social media all day. Like we all know how to do the things we want to do. We just don't know how to unstick ourselves from the roadblocks that we put in front of ourselves that are like, I'm not worth
Yeah.
losing the weight or being in shape. I'm not smart
Yeah.
enough to have the business done. We have to unpack all of that stuff. And you can't fix somebody if you don't actually understand A, their problem, or B, the solution that they want. Because if somebody comes to me and tells me something, I'm going to give them a solution, but it's a solution that defines success for me. It's like where I think they should go, and it may be that that I'm totally wrong. I had a guy called me up a couple months ago, and he was like, yeah, I don't know if your book is for me because it's all about how to be successful, and I just want to buy an 1800s farmhouse and make my own food and create my own energy. So is your book going to help me get me there? And I was like, well, maybe. I mean, my book is telling people to figure out how to find success for themselves, so I think you don't need it. You're already there. But everybody's definition, like we often end up offering solutions that we need as
Yeah.
solutions, as opposed to the solutions that somebody else needs. And so your approach of you're listening, and what you're giving back are questions rather than answers, so that people can find their own answers, is that's the witness part, I think, that you're talking about. That's the part that is you are a witness to their experience. You're just, I was saying yesterday that you're like a shaman, right? You sort of you're guiding people
Mhm.
through the experience, but the experience remains their own.
100%. And honestly, as I've come to feel more and more into it, like, so at the beginning of this journey, like I wanted to fix people. I wanted to be the guy who fixed people, right?
Yes.
Again, the achievement, the ego thing,
It
right?
feels good to
And
fix someone, right? Check, done.
100%. I
Next.
did this. Look at how great I am,
Yes.
you know? And what I've come to realize is the thing that I care about most is how can people be liberated? How can they be empowered? How can they have their own sovereignty and agency while still being connected in this community that cares about each other, right? There is this
Hmm.
balance of responsibilities. Um, and the only way I can truly empower somebody else is if I help them create for themselves the tools that help them go forward, right? So the questions develop within themselves the ability to find their own answers. And within their own answers is something that they will actually believe in. And if you believe in it, then you can achieve it. It's, you know, like those things have to be built up. And so begun to believe, and this is just for me, I'm not putting this judgment anywhere else, but to do otherwise is disempowering of people. That in some way, I would be creating uh, a new like hierarchy or guru system, and I don't
Hmm.
want to
Hmm.
be anybody's guru. I don't
Yes.
want to be the person because I'll be honest with you, I'm no better than anybody else. There's areas in life that I've explored more and I've got more experience with, and I can help to guide. And I could be, like you said, you know, that psychic shaman. Um, but there's a lot of areas I haven't figured out, and I'm guided
Yes.
by others in. And in that, I don't believe that my worth is any higher or lower than anybody else's. And so it would be disingenuous for me to have be on some pedestal where A, I had to pretend to be perfect. That doesn't sound very fun or comfortable. And B, people would look to me for everything, in which
Yes.
case they wouldn't be looking into themselves. And the only way that we can be personally liberated is if we figure out how to look within ourselves.
Right, because you can't get any stronger if you have to keep going back to someone to give you the answers every time. You have to find them within yourself. And as you said, when somebody finds the answers within themselves, they're better at actually implementing those answers in their life because it doesn't take faith, right? It takes they're actually seeing it and it's there. So
Yeah,
I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours all day long, but I try to keep these to an hour, and we're at an
yeah,
hour. So
no problem.
I'm sad to end this, but tell the fine people who are listening where they can find you. I know some people are watching this on video, so they're seeing it below on the screen. But closing thoughts and where should people find you?
Um, so where you can find me, chrisplough.com, Plough, especially chrisplough.com/I am listening. You can sign up there if you would just like somebody to talk to, some like to be heard. It's the service that I offer, and I truly mean it. Like I believe it's part of my soul's work, and I'm honored if you sign up. You're not putting any weight or burden upon me, so please do.
Mm.
Um, and there's a lot of other ways to connect. You can just Google me. The Google finds me just fine. As far as final thoughts, um, we're in this world of achievement and levels, and whether you're trying to get to the next financial level, where you're trying to get the next spiritual level, whether you're trying to get to the next emotional level, there's a lot of not enoughness. There's a lot of you're broken. There's a lot of, hey, if you do this thing, you'll finally feel good, you'll feel fixed. um, I used to believe all of it, and I don't believe it anymore. I truly believe that regardless of what we're going through, even in my most difficult, what I would consider, like looking back at the time, I thought I was broken. Even in those times, I was beautiful, I was perfect. I didn't need anything else in that moment, although there were a lot of things that helped me get to where I am. And so if you're going through something challenging right now, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're not less than you think you are. Maybe you're not unworthy. Maybe you're fully worthy. Maybe you're exactly what you need to be. And maybe you can open up to somebody and share that thing that you've been needing to share, have that conversation you've been needing to have. And maybe both of you will be better for it.
That is amazing. That is beautiful. I know that I'm better for having this conversation with you today, as I have been better for having every conversation you and I have ever had. Thank you for trusting me with your story. Thank you for trusting me doing this live. Thank you for trusting me with your friendship. You're amazing.
Mm,
Thanks, everyone.
my honor.